Another massive win for the Minnesota Wild, this time against the Montreal Canadiens. We recap all of the numbers from the Wild's 8-2 win over the Canadiens, plus a look at what sort of pace this year's Wild team is on, and Kirill Kaprizov, all today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also available anytime you want to listen. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we recap the Wild's 8-2 win over the Montreal Canadiens, taking a look at all of the numbers that led to such a dominant performance for the Minnesota Wild. Plus, we look at where this year's offense stacks up amongst the best in Minnesota Wild history and why Kirill Kaprizov may go down as the team's best offensive player and may already be the Wild's offensive player as well. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer, and the host with the most amount of time spent trying to figure out our favorite Minnesota sports teams, and now the captain of Locked On Wild. Happy to have you along on a Victory Tuesday as the Minnesota Wild took on the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens scoring first. You wouldn't know it, though, by the final score, 8-2. The Wilds get the win for the sixth time in franchise history. They score 8 goals. And for this Wild team, they really left no doubt against a Montreal Canadiens team that is undermanned and is not having really a particularly good season at all. Now, just looking at some of the impressive numbers from this win, the Minnesota Wild now are 6-0-1 since the Winter Classic, 10-0-1 in their past 11 games at the XL Energy Center. They've outscored opponents 56-25 in that span. And for the Wilds, just so many things to take away from this game. We talked earlier in the week that now that we've seen the Matt Boldy, Kevin Fiala combo really come into peak form, that this team really has 3 lines that can beat you every single night. And, we pointed out, in fact, I pointed out that it gives Dean Evason the opportunity to rely on those top 3 a little longer, which led to a short couple of appearances for the fourth line. And then the fourth line in last night's game comes away with a couple of goals. Connor Dewar with his first goal of his NHL career. Nico Sturm with the goal 22 seconds later. And so now you have a team that has 4 lines that are capable of getting it done every single night of the week and are just playing at such a crazy level right now. I don't know that I have ever seen chemistry like we're seeing between Mats Zuccarello and Kirill Kaprizov, between 2 teammates, and Matt Boldy and Kevin Fiala are trying to outdo that themselves. Take a listen to these numbers, courtesy of Michael Russo, for Zuccarello and Kaprizov over their last 9 games. Kaprizov has 7 goals and 16 points. Zuccarello has 4 goals and 14 points. Kaprizov's last 22 games since November 18th, he has 37 points, leads the NHL with 31 even strength points during that span, and Mats Zuccarello has 28 points in his last 18 games. Folks, that number 1 line is legit. that number one line may be, and I was trying to just kind of on the fly, trying to find if it's possible to even tally this sort of a thing. I think this might be one of the best, if not the best, top lines that the Minnesota Wild have ever had. And I know, taking into account the players that this Wild team has had, Marian Gaborik, who was an elite scorer for this team throughout the course of his Wild career, Mikko Koivu, Brian Rolston. The list goes on of players who have played for this team and have been really good at scoring. I think this current iteration, the elite playmaking ability of Kirill Kaprizov, the elite passing ability of Mats Zuccarello, and the do anything you need mentality of Ryan Hartman, I think has made this one of the best lines that we've ever seen. Gives the Wild a true number one line that can get you goals and can get you wins when you need them. And it doesn't stop there. The Fiala line looking unbeatable. They were ridiculous again tonight. Fiala getting a goal, Boldy getting a goal. Gaudreau nearly had a goal on a couple of different occasions. The Eriksson Ek, Foligno Greenway line was ridiculous again in this game. And we're seeing these performances stacked up together in back-to-back games. I mean, you just run down the score sheet. Boldy with a goal and an assist. Dewar with a goal and an assist. Fiala with a goal and an assist. Foligno with a goal. Gaudreau with an assist. Greenway with 2 assists. Kaprizov with 2 assists. Sturm with a goal and 2 assists. Zuccarello with a goal and an assist. Jordy Ben even got in on the scoring with a goal. Alex Goligoski with 2 assists. John Merrill with an assist. Jared Spurgeon with a goal and an assist. Any way you slice it, this team, as we'll talk about a little later on in this episode, this team just has a depth of scoring that we don't see typically from this franchise. And they're putting it on full showcase pretty much every night of the week. And it's time to start taking some notes, keeping track of what this team is doing from an offensive standpoint, because it's not something that we are likely to really see that often. Now, with this current core of players, it might be something we see more frequently, but this is something that we really have not seen throughout the history of Wild hockey, what we are seeing currently this season. So some historically good offense for the Minnesota Wild. Now, the one thing to pull from last night's game that we are going to have to watch going forward is Cam Talbot, who was pulled after 2 periods, and by all accounts, from what was said after the game, Dean Evison saying that Cam Talbot tweaked the same injury he's been dealing with over the last couple of weeks, but this time in a different spot. Talbot apparently could have finished the game, but the thought process was, if it's a tweak, why aggravate it further? And so he was pulled at that point. But this team has a lot of big games coming up, including this weekend against the Rangers, the Islanders. You follow that up with the road game against the Blackhawks. So obviously, Cam Talbot's status is worth watching, but it's a good thing that Capo Kähkönen has been playing some pretty good hockey himself in the event that he is needed to fill another stretch here. But with what February is going to bring, you're going to need to have a second goalie that can fill in every now and again. So Cam Talbot's injury status is the big thing to pull from this game. And thankfully, the Wild made it a laugher, because that could have been a huge damper on what was a big night for the Minnesota Wild. So a lot of positives to pull from last night's game. Cam Talbot's injury is worth monitoring, but really the big thing to take away is that this Wild team is pretty legit. And so We'll talk about just how legit they are coming up here because offensively, I think we can make a pretty bold statement about this team that I've been holding off on for the last couple of weeks, but now I think after what we've seen and what we're continuing to see, I think it's time to say that this might be the best offense that the Minnesota Wild have had in their franchise's history. We'll talk about why that's the case after this here on Locked On Wild. BetOnline.ag would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline.ag remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. A new year and a new updated desktop and mobile website for you to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code LOCKEDON to get things started. The NFL playoffs nearing their crescendo, the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, boxing, and UFC, plus everything all the way down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline.ag is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wilds, and again, thank you for making Locked On Wilds your first listen every day. Just again, a reminder, we are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. We're available anytime you want to listen as well. Continuing today's episode in which we recap the big win over the Montreal Canadiens by a score of 8-2. And I think with what we've seen now, the Minnesota Wild with 149 goals on the season, and that is in just 38 games. They are third in the NHL in scoring. And for this Minnesota Wild team, they're putting themselves in rarefied air in Wild history. I think it's safe to say that this may be the best offense that the Minnesota Wild have ever had. So take that number into account. 149 goals for the Wild so far in 38 games. The franchise record for goals in a season is 266. And that was set in 2016-2017 in 82 games. So the Wild are already over halfway there in less than half a season. So you take that and you spread that out over the course of a full season. They're going to end up probably crossing the 300 goal threshold, which is just ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, at this point in the season, they are averaging. Just had it here. Of course, I'm not super good in the math department. 3.92 goals per game, and so you take that 3.92 and you multiply it by 82 games. That's 321 goals, which, again, franchise record 66 shatters it. And interesting to note, in looking at that team from 2016-2017, the Wild were led in goals by Eric Staal, who, one of my favorite Minnesota Wild players throughout his tenure, but definitely a scoring center, but not a guy I don't think even in his prime that was somebody that could single-handedly take a game over and win it when needed. So you have the 28 goals from Eric Staal, 26 from Mikael Granlund, 25 from Nino Niederreiter, 22 from Jason Zucker. That was it for 20-goal scorers. No 30-goal scorers for that Minnesota Wild team. So a lot of solid players on that team that obviously were good at scoring, but nobody that was the take charge kind of player, the dynamic type scoring player who could have a run that would last, 7 or 8 games and could end up leading you to go 7-0 in those 7 games. I present you the on pace numbers for the current Minnesota Wild. So Kirill Kaprizov now sitting at 49 points in 37 games. He's on pace for 106 points, 37 goals, 69 assists in 80 games. So that would be one 30-goal scorer for this upcoming season. Mats Zuccarello is on pace for 82 points. He's got 12 goals, 26 points right now, 26 assists, 38 points in 32 games. He's on pace for 82 points in 69 games, 26 goals, 56 assists. So there is 2 20-goal scorers, 2 25-goal scorers for this Minnesota Wild team. Ryan Hartman, 18 goals right now, 14 assists, 32 points in 38 games. He's on pace for 39 goals and 30 assists in 82 games. So right around a 70-point score for Ryan Hartman, which would just blow all of his offensive numbers out of the water. That's 3 players with 25-plus goals on pace for that. Kevin Fiala has worked his way up to being on pace for 24 goals in 82 games. And with the way he's played recently, there's nothing to suggest that he can't continue it and get it past the 25-goal mark, maybe even close to the 30-goal mark. So that's another player on pace for 25 goals on the season. Marcus Foligno is currently sitting at 17 goals, 10 assists. He's on pace for 37 goals, 22 assists, 58 points in 82 games. Another player on pace for 25-plus goals. Fiala and Eriksson Ek, back from injury. He did not miss that much time. He only missed a handful of games. So he's going to get a ton of play this year. Again, on pace for 26 goals, 19 assists. So another player that's on pace for 25-plus goals. And so you have 2 guys. You have Kirill Kaprizov. You have Kevin Fiala, who are guys that we know based off of their body of work are dynamic scorers that can get on a run, that can end up influencing the outcome of several games in a row. We've seen the emergence of Marcus Foligno and Ryan Hartman. Seen continued brilliance from Mats Zuccarello and Fiala and Eriksson Ek. That is 2 elite-level scorers and 4 high-end scorers that are great complementary players to those guys. And so going back to 2016, 2017, I'll put Eric Stahl in the elite scoring category. And I'll put Granlund, Niederreiter, and Zucker in the good complementary scoring category. So you go from 1 elite scorer in Stahl and 3 good complementary scorers. I'll bite. I'll go Zach Parise too, because he had 19 goals in 69 games. So 1 elite scorer, 4 good complementary scorers, to 2 elite scorers and 4 good complementary scorers as well. And that's not even factoring in guys such as, Nico Sturma's 7 goals this season. He could end up getting, he's going to end up with right around probably 15 goals, at least based off these projections, pegged right for 15. So you have, for the first time probably in a very long time, you have 4 lines that are capable of winning every single night, and which that's why I make that point that this Wild team is as dangerous as they've ever been offensively. And that stems as well from the player that is leading the charge and is looking every bit as good as he did last year and even better. Kirill Kaprizov is probably right now the best player that the Minnesota Wild have ever had from top to bottom. So we'll finish by breaking that down a little bit. Yeah, it's Hot Take Tuesday here on Locked On Wild. So we'll finish off by talking about Kirill Kaprizov and why he is rapidly climbing the ranks of Minnesota Wild players all time. We'll finish things up after this here on Locked On Wild. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. So, a couple of things that we have been building up on today's episode in reaction to the 8-2 win over the Montreal Canadiens. And, not trying to get too far ahead of things, put the cart before the horse, so to speak. But, these types of performances are the performances that we really didn't see that often with previous Wild teams. And, it's not like the Wild have had a ton of, 7-1. They've had a couple of games they've scored 7 goals. Then this 8-2 win. So 3 games so far where they have scored, on the higher end in the goal category. They did have, they've scored 6 a couple of times as well. But a lot of times they're just scoring 5 and 4 goals every night, which is why they are, second in the Western Conference in goals, despite having a few games in hand on basically everybody above them in the standings. It's time to start having the conversation about where Kirill Kaprizov is at right now with what he has done. And historically now, we've got a little bit of a barometer as to kind of where he is at with his performance. Kirill Kaprizov becoming the 5th active player to reach 100 career points in 92 games or fewer, joining Alex Ovechkin, who did it in 77 games, Sidney Crosby in 80, Evgeny Malkin in 89, and Connor McDavid in 92 games. That list speaks for itself. Like, those are some of the best players in the NHL, and Kirill Kaprizov has done something that only those guys have done. And he's obviously got a lot of hockey left in front of him. But considering the types of players that the Minnesota Wild have had in their franchise history, it's time to, and we were doing this last year too, so this is not a revelation, but it's time to start putting Kirill Kaprizov at the top of the list for what he's already done and what he could do the rest of his career. We talked a couple of last week about what sort of goal pace Kaprizov would have to get on in order to pass Marian Gaborik, and 30 goals a season for the next 10 plus years. It's going to get him to at least 300, but it feels like he's got way more than that in the tank. And with the slow start that he had to the season, at least scoring wise, because he was doing things like we saw last night where he just is skating around the entire perimeter of the zone multiple times, just toying with the entire Canadiens roster. We've seen that from him since he came up into the league, but you look at what he has done since the beginning of the season. He had 6 assists in the month of October, no goals. But December, 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points. January, so far, he has December, actually. He had 5 goals, 6 assists. So November, 7 goals, 12 assists. December, 5 goals, 6 assists, 5 goals and 8 assists so far in the month of January in 7 games. So 13 points in 7 January games. He's got something like 35 points in his last 21 games. Is just absolutely white hot. And now that we have historical context that he is the quickest player in Minnesota Wild franchise history to get to 100 career points and has joined the company of those guys that we just talked about for having done that and becoming the 5th active player to reach that mark. Kirill Kaprizov is the best player that the Minnesota Wild have had in their franchise history, a history that includes Marian Gaborik, that includes Mikko Koivu, that includes Brian Rolston, that includes Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, up and down the list. Whatever name you want to put on there, Kirill Kaprizov needs to shoot up to the top because his talent level is something that we have not seen with this franchise before. His scoring ability is something that we have not seen with this franchise before. His ability to set up his teammates to make everybody around him better have set him apart from anybody that the Wild have had in franchise history. And so, while we expected that the Wild would beat the Montreal Canadiens, we can take an opportunity in this type of a game to look back and to see what this Wild team has done so far to this point in the season, and to see what Kirill Kaprizov has done to this point in his career. And we are seeing some very good things that just don't come around all the time for this team. And so I ask you, going forward, just keep it in the back of your head that we're seeing something rare from this Wild team. Kirill Kaprizov is helping bring that out. But if the Wild can keep it going and can stay relatively healthy, this could be a season where we see something else that the Wild have not really seen to this date in their franchise's history. And I think we all know what that is, but I'm just going to leave things right there. And that will finish today's episode of Locked on Wild. So now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure to head over to Locked on Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked on Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Locked on Bets is free and available on all podcast platforms. Just like Locked on Wild, we're available wherever you listen. We're available anytime you want to listen. Also, make sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We're available on all of them. Just type it into the search bar and you'll find everything that you need to stay up to date on all things Minnesota Wild hockey. Because if a puck drops in the state of hockey, Locked on Wild has you covered every Monday through Friday with new episodes coming out all week long as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.